This is the fourth installment of our Reboot 2022 series, and today we are focusing on all things resumes and cover letters. So I hope you came with your questions, no matter where you are in the process for these things. If we have not met before, my name is Becca Shelton. I am a career advisor here at the University of Richmond, and I am our career advisor who focuses on working with our alumni and grad students. So if you are in need of career advising or career services, I am your person. So we will go ahead and get started. I've got a few sort of housekeeping things to start off with. So like I said, we'll cover a lot of things, resumes and cover letters today. So we will cover resume format basics. I won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but hopefully it's enough of a primer to either help you refresh what you have or get started with with a resume. Talk a little bit about applicant tracking systems, because that is a very important part of understanding resumes and cover letters and how they work with your job applications these days. And then of course, we'll be talking a little bit about cover letters. If you have questions for me, please throw them in the Q&A down there at the bottom of your screen, as opposed to the chat. The chat is open if you would like to use it to comment or connect with other people here. However, I do prefer Q&A. It's just easier for me to manage questions that you might have. In terms of questions, I will have a couple instances throughout our time today where we'll pause for questions. So if you've got them, throw them in there and we'll get to them when we get there to those pause for questions. And a couple other things really quickly too. I am recording this today, so this can live in perpetuity in all of our archives, and you will have it to access down the road in the future if you would like to. Additionally, I will be towards the end of this week, I will send out the slides for this to all of you all who are here with me today, should you want to reference any of the material. So we'll go ahead and get started. One thing, if you've been to my webinars before, this is not new information, but I always like to start off with this if you are new here. So as an alumni or grad student here at University of Richmond, you do have access to quite a few really great resources. As I mentioned, I work with all of those populations. As an alumni, you have, if you are, so as an alumni, if you're a graduate of any program here at the university, that includes the MBA, as well as any program in SPCS and any of the other programs, academic programs we have here, you have career advising free for life, which is amazing. So basically what that means is that we will never charge you for this, and you can have as many or as little sessions or as few sessions as you would like with me. So that's a really fantastic benefit that not a lot of institutions offer. And in those sessions, we can talk about a whole host of things that are related to whatever situation you might be in. And so I work with a lot of folks on really sort of any part of the career spectrum. If you are sort of new and starting out, young, sort of middle career journey, and even those with a good amount of experience, whatever that is, we can work together. And you'll see over there on the left, there's a lot of different topics we can talk about, including mock interviews. So you can feel a little bit good about that if you need to brush up on your interview skills. If you would like to meet with me, I would love to do that. And you can easily schedule an appointment using Spider Connect, which is the link you see down there in the bottom left corner. If you're wondering to yourself, what in the heck is that, Becca? I don't even know. There's all these Spider things at UR. That is our system that does a few things for us, but mainly one of the things that it does is it helps you to schedule advising appointments. So if you're not sure what that is, how to get in there, send me an email really quickly and I'll give you instructions on how to access that. There's some other really great resources over there on the right-hand side of your page. But the one that I will point out, and again, the slides that I'll send out have all these links in them, is the University of Richmond Alumni Relations YouTube page. That is where all of my webinars live in perpetuity, and as well as any other program, virtual program that Alumni Relations has done. So you can access all of those things whenever you want to. If you're up at 2 a.m. and can't sleep and you are really interested in these things, you can watch a video. So those are some of the great resources that we have for you. And we will go ahead and dive into our content. So resumes and cover letters. But you might be thinking, why is she, this is strange, why is she starting out with this, talking about job descriptions? This is, understanding job descriptions is really sort of the basis for resumes and cover letters. Because resumes and cover letters really should be tailored to whatever you're applying for. Now, there's a caveat to that. I am a fan of working smarter, not harder for yourself, especially when it comes to job search and doing all of these applications that you're probably doing. It's a lot, especially if you've got, if you're a student and or you work full-time or part-time even, this can feel like it takes up a lot of your time. So one recommendation that I have here is, starting out with sort of a quote unquote, a maybe base resume and cover letter that would fit probably the types of jobs that you're applying for, right? It hits most of those skills and abilities. And it certainly is tweaked and changed and given a good once over before you actually submit it for a job. But when you're looking at the job descriptions, the first piece of advice that I have here, if you are on the job search, is save that job description. Personally, I know that to be a really good practice, and I can't tell you how many people I talk to that say, oh, I have an interview coming up, but I applied for this job like 2 or 3 months ago, and I can't even remember what it was. So it's a really good reference material for you when you do get that call for an interview to remind yourself and refresh about what this job is and what they're seeking and how you can tailor your interview. So when you're looking at the job descriptions, hopefully they will be well-written job descriptions. Now, unfortunately, there is no template that employers have to use for these. So it can be a little frustrating when maybe you see a job description that has, maybe 2 or 3 sentences and says apply here. Some are a lot more robust, right? But sometimes they will have an about us, and this is a good place to figure out what is this company about, what's important to them, what are their, mission statement, or things that are just good qualities that they're talking about with their organization. This is a good place to start thinking about that, and sort of, and then thinking about how do you align with that. One thing that you'll probably see a lot of in job descriptions is either preferred and or required qualification section. Those are great sections to figure out what are those skills and abilities and knowledges that they're seeking, right? Remember here that typically in these sections, or if they have like a responsibility section for this role saying what this role is going to be doing, the majority of the time they rank order those, right? So if you're looking at preferred qualifications, the top few bullet points are going to be quite important for that role, right? So there's going to be probably a larger percentage of that role dedicated to those things. Or that's what when the hiring manager is evaluating applications and applicants, those are going to be things that they're really looking for. So if you're thinking, where do you put your emphasis in terms of your cover letter and the skills that you're addressing, as well as some things on your resume, look to those to see what's going to be important for that. The other thing here too, just a couple more points on this slide, that I hear so much of is there's a lot of folks out there that when I talk to them, they have this sort of perception that they have to meet 100%. They have to check all of those check boxes in order to be able to apply for the job. I would encourage you to let go of that idea if that's something that you have. Because I like the 70-30 rule, right? If you are qualifying, if you're checking the box for most of their stuff, you're on the right track there, right? no, they're not going to find a perfect candidate, right? They're not going to find somebody that checks every single one of their boxes, has just the right amount of experience and skills. So my rule of thumb, and hope it's one that you'll adopt, is that if you meet most of their qualifications and you can make a very good case for yourself as to why you're a good fit for this, then I would say apply for it, because you never know, right? You never know where they're at with this this interview process, right? There are a fair amount of jobs out there that maybe this is a repost. Maybe this job has already been through one round of interviews, and maybe they made an offer and it didn't work out, right? And they're on their second round. I've gotten jobs like that in the past, and believe me, they've turned out to be fantastic. So do yourself a favor and go ahead and apply for it. You have nothing to lose but time. But if you think you can make a good case for yourself, that's a good way to go. The other thing too here, word clouds. I love this idea. So when you're looking at this job description, if you're trying, if you're sort of reading through it and it's like not making sense, or you're like, I'm not sure where to go with this, throw it into a word cloud and see what words stand out the most for you. This could be able to point you in a direction in terms of where you put some of your materials, right? So just a thought. So a few slides here about resume format that we won't spend too much time on, because we have some really good information to get to you today. So particularly for those who are experienced professionals, and I have a really great resume and cover letter guide that I'll also send out with the slides. But particularly for those who are experienced professionals, I love a combination resume, right? The typical one that you would think of is a chronological resume. And so that's where you have basically like all of your experience listed in a section, and it's, most recent to least recent. Combination resumes focus on the work history and the relevant skills. So it not only tells employers what skills you have, but where and when you got them. Really, any resume should be max 2 pages. My rule of thumb is it kind of doesn't matter if you have 30 years of work experience. Let's talk about what's most important and relevant to those jobs you're applying to and get that in on 2 pages. And there's some tricks out there that you can use, like margins, font size, font type, those kinds of things, and getting really creative on how you space things out. You can get a lot of stuff in 2 pages, but anything more than 2 and you're just sort of losing their attention. Really what's important here is showing and telling stuff. So again, talking about your relevant skills. This is where you could think about having, sort of below, and it'll be on the next slide. We have some a visual of this, but really having like a professional summary section or relevant skills up there at the top where you're hitting them with the most important information. Because even if you have a 2-page resume, in the top half of that first page, you want to hit them with what is really important and relevant here, get their attention and make them want to read the rest of it, right? So that's really important. When it comes to applicant tracking systems, we haven't talked a ton about those, but essentially what they are, you've probably run into them, even if you didn't know you ran into them. ATS are, a lot of people will complain about not being able to get their resume through to an actual person. Applicant tracking systems are the software systems that many companies use that scan through your documents and help them determine who should be picked for an interview in the first round. While this is seemingly very frustrating for the job seeker, and it can be, it is a tool that many HR departments like to use to manage the volume of applications that they're getting in, because they get a lot. These came about in the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. It was really just a convergence of the HR departments needing a tool to manage all of this, as well as the technology, even though it was rudimentary, was there to help them, right? And so ATS, I think one of the most important things to know, and I have information that I will send out, some more details about this that can help you understand more about it. Essentially what you want to know here is it's most important with applicant tracking systems to, again, read through the job description thoroughly, understand what skills and abilities they're looking for, and make sure that those are reflected in your materials that you submit, right? Whether that's a resume or resume and cover letter. Because most applicant tracking systems use a matching process. So the recruiter that's managing the hiring for this particular role that you're applying for, they're putting into their applicant tracking system, from the job description, these are the skills and abilities that we're seeking, maybe these are the most important ones. And it's going to scan your documents to see where you're matching with those, right? So that's the basics of how those work and how you get through. So that's why it's really important to understand what the job description is asking for, and you're reflecting those things in your materials. The other little bit of advice here that I have is a master resume. Great concept. Make sure you're updating it every few months. A master resume is really just your own personal document that you have. It's a chronological, can be, can not be. It's a listing of everything that could go on your resume. This is a great document that you can use to pick and choose things that might be more relevant to certain jobs that you're applying for. Because I don't know if you're like me and you've been working for any amount of time, it's remembering what you did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Please don't ask me that. That's why I keep this in a master resume. So that way I don't have to think about it. I don't have to make phone calls, get information that they might need to know. All right, so here's that quick tidbit about the resume format that I was talking about. So this would be a combination resume, which is what I typically recommend for experienced professionals. You'll see here that they have a professional summary and a relevant skills section. Now you can have either or. It sort of depends. I usually say like those in industries with lots of hard skills, particularly say IT field, having that skill section up there towards the top, I think is really important to highlight all of those things that are necessary. And, it could be a skills and certifications section, kind of whatever you need to call that to make it work for you, right? I personally have a summary section on mine, and that's just bullet form highlights, again, some of those bigger buckets of skills that are important to the industry that I'm in, right? And then you can work history. I typically recommend calling that, say, a relevant professional experience section. And so relevant sort of indicates, this might not be everything, right? But it's what's important to you. The great thing these days about LinkedIn is that you can put what's relevant to that job on your resume. And then you can use LinkedIn to highlight all of your stuff, right? And you can, as they've done here on the resume, you can put the URL to your LinkedIn on your resume, which I do recommend if you've got a LinkedIn profile. For most experienced job seekers, you can throw that education down towards the bottom. What I would recommend with education section is if you are currently pursuing a degree, or if you have very recently completed one that's relevant to what you're applying for, say particularly if you're a career switcher, throw that up towards the top between whatever the summary and skill section that you have up there, between that and your experience sections, okay? So this is just a little bit more highlight about the summary and or skills section. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Personally, I recommend bullet points. I think this is just perception wise with our minds, it's information feels a lot easier to digest if it's in bullet point form than versus paragraph form, okay? So you can really do whatever you want to. That's just my thoughts on the bullet points here. Again, with the professional summary, this is where you want to help make a connection between the jobs that you're applying for and the skills that you bring to the table. So especially if you're a career switcher or you're making a little bit of a career pivot, this is a great place for transferable skills, okay? I like to think about this again in terms of like the big buckets of skills. And if you've read through this, you probably guessed that this is from my resume. And so I focused on things that are, that are important to hiring managers within my field. So like what types of students and professionals have I worked with? I've touched base on the project management and planning of programs and things like that. And in addition, my technology skills. Okay. So there's depending on what you have to bring to the table, you can focus on a few different things here that might be important to that hiring manager. Okay. So we've got some questions. I'm going to take a sip of water. And if you've got any questions so far, throw them in that Q&A, please. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any right now. So we will move on because we've got a lot more information to get to. And I want to make sure that we keep on track for time today. So our next few slides are just going to go in depth with a couple things pertaining to resumes. Bullet points, I think this is one of the biggest pain points with people on their resumes, is really refining those and getting those to a place where they're really happy with them, which is why I wanted to talk about them. Typically, once people get their format down, the organization of it and how they want to present the information, when it comes to refining things, particularly if you have transferable skills to talk about, this is where a lot of the work is going to come in, right? And so, excuse me. So what you want to focus here with your bullet points really is, it's a balance between showcasing your strengths and your skills and the tasks that you did for that job. I mean, so the thing with resumes is that there are definitely a few rules that you really do need to follow, consistent formatting, making sure there are no grammatical errors, things are in alignment and whatnot. But there are so many things that are individualized to the person writing the resume and what you have to say. So, and I say that because, there's a lot of people that I talk to think there's a certain rule for how many bullet points you can have for any particular type of job. I would say up to 8 or 10 bullet points. It really just depends on what you have to say. I've had jobs in the past that are really robust. Like I wore a few different hats, maybe had a couple different titles. And those required more because I had a lot more to say, right? The other thing too here, when you're thinking, what do you, say if you have a job or had a job like that in the past that had so many different responsibilities, it was broad scoped. Thinking about, again, what's important and relevant to the jobs that you're applying for. What do they need to know, right? And in that context, you can also rank order your bullet points in terms of, okay, the ones that they want to see more than others, putting those tasks and responsibilities towards the top as opposed to in the bottom of that bullet list, right? So, for example, I was recently talking to a teacher that wants to transition careers. And this is an example I think that is relevant to a lot of people across industries. So with teaching and any other types of role that you might have, we oftentimes think within our role, the most important thing that we do, say, is do the lesson plans and lead the classroom and teach the students, right? As a career switcher, that might not be the most important thing that reader of that the hiring manager needs to know, right? So it's a little bit of, let's take that script out of our head and think what's important to the reader, okay? So maybe this person who's doing their resume doesn't necessarily put information about doing lesson plans and classroom management at the top. Maybe that's a little bit more towards the middle of her bullet points. And maybe she puts the lead teacher information, the supervision and management stuff towards the top. Okay. So really think to yourself, where do these things fall? What's important? I love this gut check here. If, when you get your bullet points down, thinking about if the hiring manager could only read one or two, which ones would they want to read? Okay. I love acronyms. I love a good acronym. CAR is a really great one to think about. How do you structure them? Because the other point, the other thing is, once you figure out what you're going to include in your bullet points for these jobs that you have, then the question is, that's cool. Okay, how do I write it? How do I structure it? And so thinking about your bullet points in terms of what was the challenge here? So basically, what was the task that you had in front of you? Because every task you have with a job is a challenge, right? Actions that you took, and what was the result of that, right? Not all results need to be in number form, right? A lot of times they are in number form, they're quantifiable, but not always. And so when you are writing your bullet points and thinking about these, asking yourself, is this a big deal, right? So is this relevant? Did you make an impact or improve something, a process, a way of doing things? Or did you help solve a problem in this role? Because that would be really important to include as well. And then just, does it make sense? Okay, to include. So hopefully that's helpful to at least get started thinking about bullet points as you are thinking about writing them for yourself. So here are a few resume myths that I, again, encounter a good deal of. Again, we have addressed some of these, but certainly it should not all be on one page. I think it depends. Like if you're, most of the time we recommend for undergrad students that you would have a one-page resume. Again, there are some undergrad students that I've talked to in the past that require more than one page, right? Because you just have so much going on. And if that's you, bless you. I commend you for that. But most have a good one pager. And there are some particular industries, there are some parts of finance that are, really just want to continue to see a one-page resume. But most are, you can go up to two. Again, you do not have to include your entire work history. Put what is relevant there. You would be surprised actually at how many times I get this question about, should I include a photo? No, please do not. That is not necessary in your resume. It takes up space that you can use for other things. And frankly, they can Google you and look you up on LinkedIn if that's the case. So in terms of being creative and unique, when it comes to, we were talking about applicant tracking systems, and one of the things about ATS is that, it might be really appealing to want to design your resume in Canva and make it look really nice and have all these colors and interesting things on it to catch the reader's attention. For applicant tracking systems, typically they don't like those, right? It's hard for the software to read and pull out that information that it needs. So you really want to avoid things like tables, funny fonts, colors, borders, those kinds of things, which a lot of resume templates will have in them, and particularly if you're in Canva. Now, my recommendation here is to really think about you can have a nicer version, right? One that looks a little bit better, that's more eye-catching. You can have that for purposes, say, for networking, right? If you're being introduced to a referral, or if you're updating some of your previous contacts with your resume and what you've been doing lately, those are great to share with those folks, say over email. But when it comes to job applications, particularly for organizations that are using applicant tracking systems, just keep it really simple. And the last one here, work gaps. I get a lot of questions about this, particularly nowadays where people have taken some time off from the workforce and or might be doing some career switching. So I do not recommend hiding work gaps. There's some really interesting research out lately where there are a fair amount of companies now. I think the tide is changing in terms of how they view that. Years ago, there was still a very traditional, is the only word I can think of. I like that word in this context, but there were some very traditional views about taking a gap from the workforce. I think people are much more understanding now, particularly with the last 2 years and how we have had to adjust things, that some people need to take time off work. So it should be addressed somewhere. Perhaps in the cover letter, it's often a good place to do that. But it definitely is. I think the other side of this is that if you don't say anything about it, or you don't address it, or you just leave a time gap on your resume between positions and don't say anything, that just leaves room for assumptions, which you don't want to do. And the employer just wants some kind of context. So if you find yourself in that situation, let's chat one-on-one, and we can, because those are very individualized situations, and they require an individualized response. So we can definitely chat and see what's the best way for you to address that. All right, so time for questions if you've got any. And then as we wrap up, I will be talking about cover letters. Okay, so cover letters. I've been doing this job for a long time. It is the bane of most job seekers' existence. I will just say that. Most people do not like writing them. And I think I've met maybe a handful of folks that actually truly enjoy cover letters. So just let you know you're not alone if you don't like them. So a few things to note here. So really what this says about you is this allows you to talk about your value and brand, right? How you specifically align with what they're looking for. In today's, there's a lot of opinion out there. Should we have cover letters? Should we still be required to write them? Yada, yada. There's a lot of people on both sides of the fence. There's a lot of job applications that are just not asking for them anymore. So, a lot of the times, one of the questions I will get often is, should I really even be writing them? Do I need to? Obviously, if they're specifically asking for one, yes. However, in the case where they don't specifically ask for one, I mean, really, truly, that is your choice. My advice here is, if it's a job in which you need that extra space, like you need that extra place to state your case or elaborate more on your skills and qualifications for this role, I would say it's worth it to do a cover letter, right? Worth the time and effort, because sometimes that can make a difference. Yes, employers do still read these things. So it's not a case of they're going to get lost into the black hole of the application system, because eventually your materials will get to a real person and they will be reading them. So I do think there is still merit in them. I think that it is also one of those things where you just look at each individual application and make your choice on whether or not you're going to write one, right? If they give you an option. Again, these are tailored to jobs. The way that I like to think about cover letters it's a sort of like a thesis, right? Because your thesis really with each cover letter is, I'm qualified for this role, right? Let me tell you how. But your research paper and your thesis is essentially null and void if you can't provide supporting evidence for why you are qualified for this. So this is where it gives you a chance to go into more detail and provide specific examples for them on how you meet those skill sets that they're asking for. So typically what I would recommend for this is that you would read through that job description, pick the top, say 2 to 4 qualities that they're seeking, provide specific examples, and go from there. In preparation for writing a cover letter, also reading through the company website to sort of understand their tone and culture. I think sometimes for those in creative industries, depending on the company, they could have a more laid back approach, right? Now, if you're looking at more traditional industries, say finance, and even that's changing a little bit. But there are some industries, legal industry, they're kind of probably want a more traditional tone, more cordial informal. Okay. So a few things about the formatting. And again, I have a really great cover letter guide that I can send out that has a lot more detail about these things in it. So what I always recommend is, first of all, use the same header formatting. So for you, with your name and contact information, I sort of brand your materials across the board. And it makes your work a little bit less in terms of figuring out how to have make your header up there. The cover letters are always 1 page in total. Please do not submit a more than 1 page cover letter. At that point, I think it's like a 3-page resume. You're just getting too wordy. You're going to lose them, right? And again, I think it's important to keep in mind the audience that you're writing these for. They don't have a ton of time. They don't have 10 minutes to spend, especially in the beginning of an application review. They don't have a ton of time to spend reading these things. Now, when you get down to the final interviews and it's being sent to the interview committee, say, yeah, sure, they're going to have a little bit more time. But keep it short and sweet and to the point here. Again, as with resumes, there are certain things you can do to maximize the space. You can change your margins, you can change your font size, the font type. Those kinds of things can help you fit more information into that 1 page. Paragraphs, don't indent. I actually see this a lot but do a, you can do single lines, right? So not the, I think Word now has, its default is like 1.5 spacing between lines. I just do like the one spacing, the single, but you do space between each paragraph. Here's where I get a lot of questions. Hey, Becca, there's nobody to apply. They haven't said anything. They just said, submit this on their application website. Nowadays, particularly, I mean, the vast majority of the time, they're not going to give you, say, apply to Ms. Smith. Okay. Again, I think working smarter, not harder for yourself. If they don't give you somebody to apply to, you can do a little bit of internet sleuthing to see what you can find. If there's a hiring manager for the department that you're applying, the position is in. Okay, that might be easy to find, it might not be. But if they don't give it to you, it is, in my mind, it's not important to them, right? I think what's important is the content of your cover letter. So, if they do give you somebody, or you find somebody on the internet that would be appropriate for you to address this to, just don't include first names, include their formal title. And if you can't find one, don't worry about it. Just don't even have a greeting line. Most recruiters that I know, and personally, other people that I have worked with in the past, just find it really awkward if you say, dear hiring manager, to whom it may concern, those kind of typical standard things that you would see. So just literally don't have a greeting line, and it's okay. I've submitted many cover letters like that, and I've gotten plenty of interviews from them. Particularly if you are applying over email, submit these as a PDF, not as a Word doc or, so my funny story here with learning that lesson the hard way, I was a young grad student. I was applying for my first big girl jobs, quote unquote, after school. And I was so excited to be submitting my applications. And I was so excited because I had my first MacBook Pro. And I thought that I was very cool. Well, turns out that I did not have Word for MacBook. And my cover letters and resumes looked very funny when the hiring managers opened them. If I had converted those to PDF and sent them, they would have looked just fine. But I had a very nice hiring manager who got a good chuckle out of them and sent me a very nice email back and said, you should really consider doing this because your margins and everything else looks very funny. So always apply, follow the directions. If you're using an application portal, which most organizations do have those now, to apply with, just follow their directions in terms of how, some portals want you to submit a Word version, like the Word doc on their portal, and do that. But again, just whatever directions they give. So this is my last slide, and we are running right up on time. So if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. I see we have one in there, which I'll get to in just a second. So getting started again with cover letters, a lot of people that I talk to, like, okay, that's really cool, Becca, I understand the structure and what I'm supposed to do, but how do I get started, right? Because a lot of times you'll just sit there with your Word doc open and just staring at a blank screen with a blinking cursor on it and not sure where to start. So if you're not sure, again, revisit that job description that you saved, right? Think about the qualifications, write them down, jot them down on a piece of paper on what they are seeking. Again, you can use a word cloud generator if you need some help determining what's really, standing out for them. Once you understand the qualifications they're asking for, then basically doing a little matchy match here, and between what your skills and experiences are, right? Even if they're transferable skills, or if you're going, within the same industry, write down those skills that you have and see where you match up with that, right? Because that's where you would want to focus your top, say, 2 to 4. Most people do 2 to 3 skills and give specific examples of them. And so focus on particularly the ones where you've had a really big impact, big results, where the ones that really demonstrate your skills and abilities for this role. And if there are any others, you can certainly talk about them in your cover letter. This cover letters are also a really great way to, again, explain, talk about any gaps. The one thing I'll say really quickly about those, again, those are very individualized. So if that is you, please reach out and I'm happy to have a chat with you about how you would talk about that. People take time off the workforce for a lot of different reasons. From a hiring manager's perspective, the last thing that they want is no explanation or addressing it, right? But on the other hand, you do not have to give them all of the dirty details if you don't want to, okay? In this instance, my general advice is less is more, right? You need to let them know that you took a gap. And again, how much information you give them is sort of up to you and what your comfort is, but happy to chat if you would like to. Okay, those are my slides. Open up my Q&A. Again, if you've got any, throw them in there and we will talk about them. So this question, when you are self-employed or working gig economy, what's the best way to address that in a resume? Right, absolutely, yeah, great question. On a resume, I mean, addressing it, you still need to, I would put that, you can still list it as an experience, quote unquote, in sort of however you're structuring your resume in your experience section, relevant experience, whatever. I mean, you can just call it self-employed. If there's a name for, I don't know if you're maybe talking about freelance work or things like that, you can call yourself a freelancer, just say freelance work, and sort of have some bullet points to describe that. So I hope that's helpful, Chris, in sort of figuring that out. But yeah, I think with the freelance or self-employed work, I don't think we need to overthink that. Putting it in your experience section, and just addressing it and putting some bullet points with it to make sure they understand what you are doing with that. So I hope that was helpful. Okay, so I don't see any more questions in Q&A right now. So again, here is my contact information. I would love to hear from you if you've got specific questions. We can do a deep dive into a resume and cover letter review if you want. My next session is a week from today at 12:15, and we will be talking about interviewing and negotiations. So again, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.